I'm Tilly Brooke, and I'm your host for this evening from Now Press Play, and I want to give everybody a really warm welcome to our webinar, The Power of Sound for Immersive Learning. Now, we're delighted that you could join us for this exciting and very explorative discussion on the use of sound and how, especially when it's combined with immersion and storytelling, that it can enhance learning experiences for children both inside and outside of the classroom. Now, what impact can it have on increasing engagement levels, stimulating imaginations and building life skills? So I'm going to be speaking to 3 expert and very experienced guests to discover their approaches to learning through sound, how it can help ignite creative thinking and support well-being, as well as hopefully a few simple ideas from them that you can get going with it as well in your school. Now, for anyone out there who's watching who doesn't know much about us, Now Press Play is one of the UK's EdTech 50 companies, and we provide primary schools with immersive audio adventures that bring the curriculum to life. And we do it in a very accessible way, supporting children of any ability and background to realise their full potential. We've been doing it now for nearly a decade. We're 10 next year, and it's been a very child-centred approach to learning using sound, story, and movement. And that is exactly why we wanted to explore this conversation with you all here today. So I'm going to take this opportunity to introduce you to our wonderful guests. And first up is Alison. I'm just going to do a bit of spotlighting, I think. Hold on one moment. There we go. Hello, Alison. Thank you so much for joining us. So Alison was an inner city executive head teacher for nearly 20 years and CEO for 5 years. She has a passion for social justice leadership, well-being, equity, inclusion, and diversity. She has a reputation for excellence in leadership, leading schools with high social challenges to be in the top 0.1% nationally, top in 3 London, and sustain high attainment over time. And she's also, very excitingly, the founder of the newly launched Above and Beyond Education. It's a social media platform for all educators and schools to celebrate, connect, support, grow, and collaborate to make every school into a great school. And I definitely recommend you check that out. Next up, I would like to introduce you to, if I spotlighted correctly, to Rebecca or Becky. So Becky, Rebecca Gregory-Clarke, or Becky as we've been calling her, sorry, is head of Immersive at National Film and Television School and StoryFutures Academy, the UK's National Centre for Immersive Storytelling. She was formerly head of technology to Immersive at Digital Catapult and a development producer and research technologist at BBC R&D. So welcome to you, Becky.
Hi, lovely to be here.
And next up, we have Jocelyne Quennell. Jo is Director of Wellbeing at the Institute for Arts and Therapy and Education. She's registered with the Health and Care Professionals Council as drama therapist and art psychotherapist. She's also registered with the United Kingdom Council for Psychotherapy with the Humanistic and Integrative Psychotherapy College. She's been in the field for 30 years with a wide range of experience with both adults and children. So a huge thank you to all of you for joining us today. We are really excited about having you here. And I'm going to ask you the first question. Oh no, wait, sorry. I'm being very disorganized because I distracted myself with spotlighting. But for anyone who's watching live, whether you're on social media, make sure you do join in the conversation in the chat function. And there's a Q&A as well. So if you do have any questions, pop them in there and we will aim to answer as many of those as we can at the end. Okay. So enough of me fluffing and talking, over to the experts. So Becky, I wanted to come to you first with this one. Given your expertise and experience in your sector, what would you say is the benefit of using sound in your work?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So I'm coming from a sort of creative storytelling sector, and immersive in my particular context, we use as a very broad phrase. I think it's always worth reiterating what we mean by this because it's a really big umbrella phrase actually. But for us, it encompasses everything on the virtual augmented reality spectrum to incorporating immersive theatre elements and of course immersive sound-led pieces. The thing that for us ties it all together is that they're all enabled by some kind of immersive technology in some way. But fundamentally, from a creative point of view, I think immersive experiences they're not just about telling stories that people want to hear or want to watch, but also about building a world you want to be part of. That's what makes it immersive. So there's this world building element that goes hand in hand with the immersive storytelling, and sound has just such a crucial role to play in bringing those worlds to life. It brings stories to life. It can really ground you in a place and a specific time and place, and tap into emotion. And even those immersive pieces that are also visual pieces, there's so many really strong sound-led pieces that we see coming through. They really do stand apart when the sound is done really well. I think in terms of sound-only pieces, I mean, there's such a brilliant load of examples, I think, out there at the moment. To pick just a few really, I think, innovative uses of immersive sound I've seen the last few years. There's a great company, UK-based company called Darkfield, that specialise in immersive theatre delivered through sound effectively. They started off making pieces in darkened shipping containers and delivering it in person, and they're now delivering things online. Earlier this year, I think during the pandemic, another example is the Donmar Warehouse Theatre in London put on a binaural sound play when they had to completely rethink the way that they were delivering theatre. That play was about it's called Blindness. It was a sort of dystopian experience about a blindness pandemic, very apt for the situation. But just completely rethinking the way they do things. Through to things like, again, a few years ago, historic royal palaces put on a piece called The Lost Palace. That was another sort of binaural audio tour kind of experience, so a bit more educational in nature and factual. And just speaking from experience, as you mentioned, I used to work at the BBC. The BBC R&D have done a lot of work in adaptive radio plays and perceptive media that alters the sound and the story based on things it knows about the user. So I think, in my sector, everything from theatre to heritage locations or broadcasters are looking to use the power of sound to deliver amazing storytelling content. And I think it's never been more important, actually, just because, amongst other advantages, it is for makers, it can be a lot cheaper to make or easier to make, but it's definitely sometimes a lot easier to deliver and distribute than many other kinds of immersive experiences. And these are really big advantages right now as well. So yeah, there's a lot to be positive about in terms of immersive sound.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Becky. When you were saying that, something popped into my head that I'd been listening to on the radio the other day about radio being kind of theatre for the mind, and how it really does help kind of inspire that imagination and creativity because it's sparking off in your mind. Great, thank you. Alison, so same question to you. What would you say the benefits of using sound are in your work?
The benefits of using sound is it's essentially, I see sound as the way in which we communicate with each other and understand each other, irrespective of who is there with you in the community. So diversity doesn't mean that we can't communicate through sound, and sometimes we think that it can only be done through signals and all that kind of stuff, but there's so much more, and it's a way of us using it's a way of expressing ourselves. So I think that we learn how to express ourselves and to extend ourselves from the youngest age. We learn it socially and emotionally from home and then from school, and we then think about how we're going to represent ourselves through it. And so a critical part of school life is accepting that every child is different and every child will communicate in a different kind of way and see that as an extension of their personality. So it's everything from how they speak, the accents that they bring, the different kinds of sounds they make, the enunciation. Tone is really important. Some children understand tone and some children don't understand tone, especially with the younger children. They don't always quite get it right, and they'll either mirror what they hear at home, but they also learn so much from each other, especially if there's diversity, but also from the adults in the classroom with them. So I think that teachers have to be very present in the way in which they use sound to communicate with their children, so that it comes in a very sort of even and measured way, so the children can receive it irrespective of what their background is. So for some children, loud noises will be really, really scary. Raised voices will be really, really scary. And for other children, silence will be really, really scary, depending on how that is used as a form of communication at home. And so it's the one place where children can learn diversity of sound probably is at school. And then there's the whole other side of silence, which is silence and the importance of listening. So silence, I think silence being used as being used in a purposeful way, so that you can be calm enough to receive teaching and to contribute and to find a vacuum that you can be heard in, is important for the teacher and for the children. And I think that COVID has made us become much better at understanding the notion of deep listening. So all of those, all that online learning, which was probably difficult for adults and for children. The one thing that the children had to learn to negotiate with in a different way was the whole concept of turn taking in a different kind of way. So in a classroom, you can have multiple voices, and you can have small group work and all of those sorts of things. And obviously with online learning platforms and so on, the children have learned to listen to just one voice at a time. And because we were learning to listen to one voice at a time, it meant probably that we got better at deeper listening. And we moved beyond that phase of listening to respond, and probably got better at listening to understand, which is probably one of the biggest bonuses that we could have had through the online learning, because that was a skill that many of us were losing over time. So yeah, and also sort of just understanding, you often in classrooms, you have dominant voices and then you have quieter voices, whereas we probably had some kind of equity that started to come through over the past year, of hearing voices, one voice at a time, but in a more measured way, so that everybody knew that they were going to have a chance to be seen and to be heard. And I guess the whole other thing that goes on for us is this sort of use of language and the richness of language. And certainly for me, working in an inner city school where we had more than 30 languages, so the children never had a problem navigating that and understanding each other and picking up bits of each other's language. And sometimes they're being blended languages, you know. And certainly for me, I grew up bilingual, and I know there was a stage in my life when I didn't know whether I was speaking English or Afrikaans, and I think a lot of children come into school in that kind of way, and the children understand that and accept that. So yeah, I just think schools are language rich, whether it's silence, whether it's listening, whether it's actively making noise to express ourselves. School is the richest place for those things to be happening.
Thank you so much. And I love, you know, thinking about silence as an important sound as well. As when you first said that to me, it was like a ping moment for me. So yeah, thank you. And Jo, how about for you?
Well, sound is so important, the human voice, for connection and empathy and compassionate presence. I would pick up on the theme of deep listening, and also the social justice agenda in terms of equity and liberation for every child to be able to communicate and express themselves. Children who don't necessarily talk with words, thinking about neurodiversity, thinking about the ways in which we consider children's rights around provision, participation, protection. We need to support every child to be able to enjoy education and fulfill their potential in terms of their growth and development. So therapeutically, My work is around trauma-informed schools, psychotherapy, the arts therapies, child and adolescent development and well-being. So maybe using music is fundamental to creative group work of every kind, really, in terms of connecting to children's own cultural heritage, and also the ways in which they make meaning in their relationships with one another. I think the immersive experience is fundamental to the arts in psychotherapy. Mm-hmm. We use at the Institute for Arts in Therapy and Education, we use sand play, poetry, puppetry. We use drama, music, movement, dance, a whole range of different mediums in a very integrative way. And we need that kind of multi-sensory approach to growth and learning and healing that involves kinesthetic, visual, auditory, so that children can enter into lived experience with their whole self and communicate about their lived experiences also, which might be beyond words. So empathy, tone, as we were talking about the classroom, it's so important, isn't it? The volume, the prosody, the tone of the voice, and the way in which we're able to connect with the rhythm and flow of our emotional experience, the musicality of communication. I think sound is vital for our sense of who we are in the world and for the development of our relationship to ourselves and other people. There's so much related to mental health, well-being, social justice, and it's a feast of possibilities, really, to consider the power of sound.
Yeah, I agree. Hopefully we've got enough of an hour to get into this feast as well. It's so exciting hearing what you guys are all saying, but I'm going to move us on to and ask you, Alison, can you give any examples of how you've seen the benefits you've mentioned applied within a learning environment, both maybe inside and outside the classroom?
Oh gosh, that's just so there were so many things that we did which was important around sound. So obviously music was the one thing, and especially when you every classroom is diverse, no matter where you are in the country. You've got lots and lots of different types of people who come there and communicate in different kinds of ways. But as soon as you start doing music, it can be incredibly unifying because it becomes collective voice, whether it's choir or whether it's making any kind of using any kind of instrument to bring together. So that's one way of the children learning one language together and growing through that and communicating with each other. I think storytelling is a massive part of school life. Sadly, often just I was amazed to discover how many schools no longer have story time, which I think should be an important part of every child's school day, irrespective of what their age is, because listening to something unfold, does kind of do enormous things for the imagination. And of course, for us, storytelling from around the world is another way of opening up experiences in a different kind of way and getting different parents coming in as well as children doing that. We taught our PE in Spanish because we didn't have time to do both things, and so sometimes it was a good way of just blending things. And of course, when so we had a Spanish PE teacher, and for him it was completely fine, and the youngest children had no problems whatsoever, just following the rhythm of his voice and understanding it and just getting on with it. And the older kids, well, do you know what? They wanted to do PE. So of course they just got on with learning Spanish, and that kind of barrier wasn't there. And it was really interesting to see them thinking about enunciation and pronunciation, and it just became a natural way of learning a language. And I think they're really listening to the rhythm, which was quite exciting. And I think that their levels of using a second language through school was kind of different because they learnt it in that kind of way rather than breaking that form of communication down into some kind of perfunctory grammar exercise. And so they were really learning about language being communication in a different kind of way. The big thing for us as well was we used meditation quite a lot, and that ran through the whole school. We had somebody come in from the local Buddhist center because they will do mindfulness training at a very competitive price, and of course it then means it's going to go back into the community in a different kind of way. We used it at the beginning of the school day, immediately after play, immediately after lunch, so that the children just had a space. Children like silence, and it meant that they could get into a space where they could get themselves ready for learning. It started off with adults leading those sessions. They were just 3 minutes long. And then we got to a point where the children were sort of saying, can we lead it today? Or sometimes nobody led it, but they just wanted to be quiet together. But especially after morning play, but actually even at the beginning of the day, that silence was a chance for them to really think about whether they want, if something was upsetting them, it gave them a chance to work out whether or not they wanted to share it with somebody or not, or whether they were prepared to let it go for reasons of their own. But it did mean that they learned the power of silence. So it wasn't about emptying minds at all, because I don't think you can empty your mind, but it was about preparing yourself to receive whatever's coming next, and to be very present in that moment rather than what happened then or what's going to happen. It's just about being present right now. The other thing that was really, really important was working with the adults in terms of reading children's communication through their language. So sometimes children make noises because they need to they want to be noticed for whatever reason, to understand that it is an extension of personality. It's a way of communicating all sorts of emotions, and often when children begin to make, I don't know whether we're going to talk about negative and positive sound, but it's a way of understanding that children make positive noises. There's nothing nicer. I was doing a session with some head teachers the other day about how they get through a day where you don't have space to breathe, and you go from event to event to event, and so you end up suppressing your feelings completely. It's just like, well, how do you not do that? How do you allow yourself to feel so that you can feel more whole? And almost everybody said they would go and find a group of children, and often the youngest children, because they would help them to feel reconnected and more human again, if you like. And so that goes the same way for children. They need to find a way to feel present, to feel all of their emotions, and to understand that we have a broader range of emotions than the three that everybody seems to know, which is happy, sad, and angry, but beginning to feel what's going on and then communicating those feelings in different ways through sound. And there's the noises in the playground, which is really, really important. I think playground noise is massively important because it's about freestyle time, expressing yourself as wholly as you want to. And the bravest children will, of course, express themselves exactly as they want to, and the not so brave children will feel like they've got to conform to their peers, and helping them to navigate all of those sorts of things. I mean, it's such a big question, but basically it's everything. It's everything that happens in a school day, and then a whole lot more. Right.
Did Jocelyne, did you want to add anything, or Becky, onto that? Kind of. Okay. Right. Actually, Alison, I wanted to ask, because you did have Now Press Play in your school, and that's like a very specific audio kind of way of communicating. Just kind of how you felt about that as a tool when you were using it in lessons as well.
So I have to say that Now Press Play was incredibly popular with the adults as well as with the children, and it was one time I think we ended up having to get a second set because it's just like there's so much tension about whose turn it was to use the headphones, because it's an immersive experience. And what was really great about it was that the way in which the children adapted to what they were hearing through their headphones was deeply personal. So they'd be hearing the soundtrack that you guys laid down, but the way in which they received it could vary based on their personal experience. And the other day we had a really important discussion about the soundtrack that you've got around World War II experience, and how different children can receive that based on their own personal experience. And of course, you'll have some children who will just see it as an adventure, and they will go and hide under desks and do all of the things that the experience allows them to get into that moment in time, and it brings the imagination alive. But of course, for some children, it doesn't bring the imagination alive. It may be a way of bringing back traumatic experiences, for some of the refugee children or whatever. And so for those children, it was their opportunity to develop a deeper understanding of either what happens in the world to others or what's happened to them, and then how they communicate that to the world. And then, of course, it brings out, there are some people who will think using Now Press Play is a teacher's cop-out. It's really easy, gives them something to do for a little while. And it takes incredibly skillful teaching to use that immersive experience really, really well. And the best teachers use it incredibly well, because first of all, it's observing the children and how they respond to that soundtrack and how they express themselves based on what they're hearing. It's useful, and basically it's time to really observe children and to get to know children better, because you see their responses. It's very clear from the outset who's coping well and who needs more time to talk. But then the quality of writing that we got from the children at the end of an Now Press Play session was superior, because the children really thought about what they were feeling, what they imagined was going on, and you could begin to think about the richness of feeling in a different way. So it was one way of getting children to think beyond happy, sad, angry to a much deeper range of emotions, and thinking how they're going to express that. And then, of course, once they begin to do that, you begin to start seeing them talking about others they understand empathy in a different kind of way. They understand compassion in a different kind of way, and it gets extended through that experience. So, if there is a school that hasn't got your headphones, they're really missing out on something massive in terms of extending. There's a wonderful dictionary called Emotionary, and we used that dictionary alongside Now Press Play in the classrooms, because it actually defines a broader range of emotions. Yeah. And we want children to understand the depth, just how complex we are. And of course, when we understand how complex we are, we can understand how complex other people are, and we communicate with each other in a different kind of way.
I'm gonna jump in there. Thank you for that, and Becky. I wanted to kind of ask you, could you illustrate the potential for using immersive sound compared to other digital audio content formats? And I think Alison was already touching on how the audio can bring out emotions and imagination, but maybe you can build on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting. Sound-led pieces definitely play into a big trend of audio books and podcasts that is very current, and that sort of there's a big audience for both of those things. But it's not the same as a format. I think it's easy to sort of think it is. As I touched on at the beginning, I think true immersive experiences and immersive sound pieces they're not just about being told a story, it's about making your participant part of the story. And I use the word participant deliberately there. It's not just a listener, it's somebody who's taking part in something, or at least that's how it should feel if it's truly immersive. You know, as I've already said, you know, putting them in a place in time, but also potentially allowing them to interact and influence the story in some way. And that doesn't have to be scary, branching narrative, kind of, you know, full-on interaction. It can be really subtle. There's so many clever ways of doing this now. Actually, this is just to shout out this example, that it's not a sound-only piece, it's actually a virtual reality piece. But there was a great piece made a few years ago called Make Noise, that was made by the BBC with a creative studio called Anagram, about the suffragette movement. But it built in this ability to use your voice to interact. So at certain points you're prompted to shout and you know, or to say the names of the women that inspired you the most. I think that's something that stuck in my mind, that kind of thing. And you know, it's subtle and it influences a bit of what you see without, you know, being too intrusive to the story, and the storyteller can still get across what they need to. But I remember that one because you know, it went to I know they took it and tested it out with their school-age children, I think sort of early secondary school, and the engagement of, you know, these these kids sort of using their voices to propel this story was, you know, just really, really fascinating to see. And I think, you know, to pick up while Alison was speaking, I was, you know, it was making it really clear to me, you know, children are a very specific kind of audience, you know. With all of these things, you've got to choose stories that work well for the medium and for the audience that you're using. There's plenty, you know, I mentioned podcasts, there's plenty of stories out there that belong as podcasts. They don't really need to be made immersive, you know, it's totally fine that. But there are other things that really lend themselves to being just, you know, brought to life in this more immersive way. And absolutely, you know, children, they have a, you know, these specific characteristics, as any, you know, audience group will be, will have. And I think immersive and interactive experiences have a huge potential for creating adaptive content that can work for a particular audience as well, if you understand your audience, is really the key part of that. And I think it's yeah, sort of fascinating sitting from my side. So obviously I'm less in the education space, but very much, you know, in the world of storytellers. And you know, there's so much great storytelling talent, particularly in the UK. You know, it's something that we're very good at in the UK. But combined with all of the sort of knowledge that, you know, Alison and Jo have in those particular of those particular audiences and what they need and how they learn and how they interact, I think there's just so much more untapped potential still in terms of immersive sound.
Jo, you about to unmute yourself? I saw you come forward. Yeah.
Just really following on from what Alison and Becky have said about the importance of the child-centeredness of being finding yourself as the protagonist in a story, finding yourself taking risks in terms of spontaneity and play and drama and improvisation, that process of self-discovery through improvisation and play. And as Alison was suggesting, every child finds their unique personal experience in the midst of that universal story. And whether that's through story, myth and imagination in terms of metaphors, whether that's the literal stories of people's lived experience, developing a coherent narrative is key to recovery from trauma. And in terms of adverse childhood experiences, which so many children may have had within their own personal history, being able to express themselves and to build their self-awareness, confidence, self-esteem, to strengthen their capacity for emotional regulation, their identity, their self-concept, making meaning with others in terms of joining in experiences together, and going through adventures with challenges can build ego strength and sense of belonging, resilience, really engineering as well through narrative and through music and through theatre making, in a sense, how you can build new neuronal pathways in the brain actually towards recovery. We know that children's brains actually grow through their interactions with others. The work of cognitive, social and affective neuroscience today, mirror neurons, very key to children's development. So their academic and cognitive learning, as well as their social and emotional learning, can really evolve and develop through sensory, symbolic and projective play. But overall, they're stepping into that drama, into that landscape of the imagination with their whole self. And that's wonderful, because they're going to be going on journeys, mythological, fantastical. Their imagination is going to be fully stimulated and alive. And as Becky was saying, in terms of the world that they live in, how can we reimagine the world in new ways? We really need to support children to reinvent themselves and the future. And I hope that this kind of technology is really a way in to children being able to take ownership of the future in new and exciting ways.
Becky, did you have anything to add with that?
Yeah, I really like that, Jo, sort of that idea you sort of bring up about bringing their world to life, I suppose, as well. You know, I think there's so much more that could, you know, I just see so much potential here, I suppose, in terms of using this medium and the sound, you know, these sort of soundscapes almost for students to actually make their own soundscapes, you know, that sort of thing as well, not just be served them, you know, which is, you know, brilliant for lots of things, but actually there's, you know, there's so much they could do to kind of craft their own worlds and get other people to understand where they're from, you know, and their experience of the world as well. Yeah, just as you were speaking, Jo, I thought there are just so many more possibilities there that would be just brilliant to explore.
Yeah, and that's something that we always do encourage our schools, because they've got this equipment which is the kind of listening and doing through the headphones, but actually it's in reverse too. And I think somebody was putting in the chat what they did with their school, but you know, we always say you could create and write something yourself, and the children can have their own voice, or they can put soundscapes together. And then also creating something for someone else is very empowering as well, isn't it? I mean, Alison, in a school environment, how was that for you?
The best type of learning is where children show their understanding by creating. So whether it's doing an animation or doing a piece of artwork or making music, they are showing us what they understand, and they're bringing their world alive to whoever wants to be their audience. You know, as a mum, I also remember my own daughter doing her endless plays, which really gave me insight into what she'd seen happen. You know, if you want to know what's going on in your child's world, observe them when they're doing that kind of role play stuff and so on. And teachers as well, getting children to show what they understand through a unit of work by bringing it to life in one way or another is the perfect way in. You know, we think that we need to get children to do written assessments, but we don't. We can actually find more creative ways to assess the way in which children understand what they've been exploring in the classroom. And actually now, just thinking about it, I wish I'd had that idea when I was in the school, and they could have used the headphones to sort of, you know, you've done this unit of work, now go away and show us your understanding in you know, by laying down some kind of soundtrack, and and then yeah, making decisions from there. I think that's really interesting.
Jo, my question for you, you kind of answered it by creating it all yourself, but it was talking about kind of COVID, in times of COVID, the positive impact that sound can bring to learning and creative experiences. So I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to sort of tease out of that.
Yes, well, I think it's important in the post-COVID era that we've become a little bit more sensitive to listening to each other in terms of the distress and the loneliness, the isolation that people have experienced, bereavement, the wide range of emotions. As Alison was saying, a full affective range with all the nuances of awe and wonder and delight, as well as rage or hate or terror. You know, there's a full affective range, and the language of the emotions, I think, through the arts and through theatre making and storytelling, enable us to express and contain these feelings. And that helps us to feel less alone and less isolated in terms of sharing our lived experience and bringing dignity and transformation to people's wounds. I've seen in the chat that Robbie Boyd has been mentioning that he's been using music and using that on Zoom with children to make lyrics and stories through song making with children that has enabled them to express digesting and assimilating their experience and sharing their knowledge and understanding of themselves and the world through song and through connection through music. So I think anything that creates a context of artistic endeavor and sharing and self-expression and communication is going to help us to collectively build, and we need to be able to build together, because we're in a post-Brexit, post-COVID world, and we need to build our community well-being and our community resilience. We need to make those connections across our differences and our different worlds that we inhabit. We've got to build those bridges and make those links so we can create a shared reality together that we can all inhabit and survive and thrive and flourish.
Yeah, that's so true. Thank you. Before I ask another question, Alison, Becky, did you want to add on or build on anything there?
No, I think, well, actually, I suppose I was just going to, I guess, highlight one other thing. I think that's just such a almost not obvious thing, perhaps, about immersive type experiences compared to some other, digital media formats, is that when it's true, something is truly immersive, it can and should be very consuming, actually, which is, sometimes obviously a real advantage if you want to get people to focus on the story or the content or the material you're trying to deliver. I don't, this is anecdotal and personal, but I love an audiobook for when I'm doing my laundry, because I get through so many books and so many chores because I can do them at the same time. But if I had to learn something through that, I don't think I could, my brain is not on it. But something, an immersive piece should really immerse you in that world and really get you to focus and give you time to absorb what's going on, actually, and give you that. It's quite precious time, actually, to really be absorbed in that and deliver, and hope, and therefore it has the potential for training to be delivered in a way that doesn't really necessarily feel just feels very natural, I think.
Yeah, I think, I love the idea of doing it in your laundry. It's a list of laundry works, it's great. But yeah, when it's really fully immersive, it makes you feel like you're really there and it's really happening to you. And And that's when your imagination really sparks, doesn't it? You know, I've done punch drunk theatre in a school as well, and kind of, you know, doing Now Press Play, and it's all those things where it's the wow moment when a child is really engaged because it's been happening to them. You know, whatever medium it is, whether it's playing a sound stimulus to them for the rainforest because it's a hook into their topic, but just those really simple things that can have a big impact on how you feel and creating that emotional arc and journey.
I think that's right. I think it's about creating spellbinding environments where children can really focus and re-engage with a re-enchantment of the world around them. And I think the soundscapes are enchanting, and we need children to feel inspired by the world, because there's actually a lot of real challenges and difficulties, and we need to be able to conceive of awesome, wondrous possibilities. And I think sound is an amazing stimulus for children's creativity and imagination.
I love that you brought up Punch Drunk, because I think that is probably one of the most amazing experiences that I recall happening in our school. And the children really struggled to believe that the room that was made into the secret shop could possibly be in their school, because it was just so far removed from their school experience. And the fact that they kind of had a slide, and then being in the smallest space possible. And I can remember when Punch Drunk came and set up the scene, and the staff went in there at first, they kind of thought, kids aren't going to cope with this in the small space and all that kind of stuff. But being in a safe, contained space where they were being told a story, and then also being given the button where they were, you know, that they were keeping the secret from the other children so that they could discover the secret place as well. And listening to the children at the end of the day, trying to tell their parents about the secret shop that really existed in their school, and the parents just not being able to connect with it. But then that became the sort of unifying experience for the school community. And I suppose what was really precious in that, I think the children got, I mean, yes, of course, you know, it was, I think, one of the all-time biggest experiences that the children will remember. But for me as a school leader, it highlighted the importance to me for being quite conscious about the spaces that we bring the children into to have a shared experience. So, you know, often we want children to sit upright in a particular way and learn about story, and we listen in different ways. My daughter, I can remember teachers would say she's gone off into some kind of imaginary world of her own, and she hadn't, because what she does is she looks out of her right eye and there's a pressure point there, and she sits and she listens, and I know she's taken the most in when she is feeling that point on her eye and looking into the distance and receiving information. So part of our communication and getting into storytelling and immersive experience and so on is allowing the space to feel safe and comfortable and happy so that we can receive what's going on. But most importantly, allowing children to be individual in the way in which they listen. Because listening is not like this.
No, I just realized we're talking and it's 7:49 and we've got 10 minutes, and I have promised all of the listeners that we would get some top tips from you and answer as many questions as possible. So I'm going to ask you the top tip question and then move over to a few of the Q&As. So sorry to hurry you along there, Alison. But how kind of, if each of you could think of maybe a top tip or two top tips max about how educators who are listening can maybe start to implement using sound and working with children, you know, either it could be something very simple or you know, just something that you could recommend. Let's go to Alison. Why not? We'll start with you.
Oh gosh, I was hoping I wouldn't be first. Okay, so I think the top tip is the importance of silence. So sometimes when you want children to listen, you raise your voice, and actually you get the you can get the adverse effect. So sometimes whispering, but also I think that having seen the power of mindfulness as a whole school approach was really great for everybody's well-being, but it also meant that children could go into a space of learning, ready to listen and ready to learn and ready to be present. So I think that would be a top tip. And then the second tip is definitely to make sure that children are given the opportunity to express themselves in as many ways as possible. I think we have a very narrow definition of the way in which children's voices are allowed to be heard in school, but actually having that diversity is critical.
Thank you. Jo, what would your top tip be?
Well, I think listen in depth. Be aware that sound can harm as well as heal, and be mindful not to shout at children. Reflect on their behaviours as communication about their lived experience, and look deeper and go beyond the racket sounds of what you might initially see in children's distress or communication, and go a bit deeper, listen in more depth to what they might be carrying within them, and the kind of internal sounds that they might have going on within them as a result of potentially challenging experiences in their own lives that might be related to abandonment or intrusion or neglect or abuse or distress. So I'm holding in mind those children that carry trauma, and also play music to them. Play music of every kind, of every culture, of every different genre. Bring a sort of postmodern medley of possibilities and play music to them, and let them find themselves in the rhythm and flow of everything that culture and art and music has to offer our kids, to help them grow into who they are and expand into everything they can be.
Lovely, that's really beautiful. I love that. Thank you. And Becky, what would your top tip be?
Well, I mean, my top tip would be to end on Jo, because it's difficult to beat that, I think, as a way to round up. But I'll give it a go. So I think, I mean, obviously I'm coming from a slightly different place, but I think if you're interested in sort of, trying to integrate or do, original work with sound in an education setting, or test things out, the UK has just got a wealth of really talented sort of creative partners, creative studios, storytellers, looking to work in this immersive sector. It's a relatively small but very growing sector, and I know that there's so much appetite to do really interesting content like this, and they've got great skills, but they don't know your audience and your context like you do as an educator. I think there could be just really interesting, almost sort of R&D or projects almost that I think could easily sort of be fostered out of a really good partnership between an educator and creative storytellers. So I guess my top tip would be to look out for these storytellers. I mean, there's there are a bunch of different sort of immersive events and things that happen in the UK. Many of them, of course, remote now, easier to attend, and find a lot of these makers, and look for some of the examples that are already out there. They might not be quite right for a use in a school yet, but I'm sure to give you lots of inspiration for the kinds of things that you can do. There's really a lot of this stuff going on in the UK that I think we should definitely capitalise on.
Thank you. So I'm going to choose one question from the Q&A. I apologise, Q&A people, but the one that triggered me was talking about early years, actually, because my son's nursery, for example, do a move to write, and they play music. So Joe, it was when you were talking, it made me think about this. And then the children do mark making, and somebody has written here, what support does the use of sound give children in early years? Who wants to go first? Hands up.
In what way? Music?
It could be, it doesn't have to be music. That was just me with my experience.
Nursery is the one place where sound is super important, because the children are listening and they're navigating and they're trying to work out how to express themselves. And so giving the early years children as many opportunities to learn about the different ways in which we can communicate ourselves. We can communicate through different types of sounds. So whether it's having those musical instruments out on the playground, which used to drive me mad, because my office was right by the early years playground, and listening to, there was one point I just I can't think drum anymore, took a load of rain sticks out there, which was really, really lovely actually. So it's providing them with different opportunities so they can understand things like tone and emotion and all of those sorts of things, but also kind of listening and maybe taking a line for a walk when listening to a piece of music. So thinking about the experience that Joe was talking about, sort of bringing different types of music into their lives, and then thinking about whether they express it through physical movement or taking a line for a walk on a piece of we used to have wallpaper everywhere so that children could just sort of do free expression, all of those sorts of things, through to not getting too bored with the fact that they put on a play that never feels like it's going to stop, but is nonetheless incredibly important.
Thank you. And I just want to squeeze in one more that's come up from someone, because the other one was anonymous. This one's from Ali Ward, and he says, have you had experience of using JPP with children with autism? I'm interested in the concept of them having a personal experience within a group as opposed to a whole group experience, which could be overwhelming. And I'm thinking JPP is actually NPP. Now press play, that must be. So maybe that's a question for me, unless you had anyone with autism in your school that may have listened to it.
We had autistic children in every class, and they engaged with it in their own way. So I think you start from where the child is at. And of course, a lot of the children with autism had support of one kind or the other. So it was really about making sure that whoever supports them is prepared to support them through that experience. But we didn't have children with autism not being able to participate. They just absolutely got on with it.
And I'd just add on that from my experience, when I've been in a school, there was one child in particular who didn't like having something around his head. So what we found is that they could plug in to the headsets, kind of the headphones that you can split, so that they felt that they had control to not have it immediately over their ears. Or you could play it out loud for a child like that as well. So there's definitely ways of making sure that it's inclusive. Joe, did you want to add something?
Just that, as Robbie's been suggesting, singing is so important for early years, and really important for, again, that sense of belonging and community, as Alison was saying to begin with, the sound and the movement choirs, dance, music, movement, really important for early years, sense of self and growth and development. Yeah, wonderful stuff, really important for child development. And in terms of Ali's question, I think sometimes children can feel overwhelmed by sensory stimuli from the environment, particularly sometimes children on the autistic spectrum. And I think it could be quite insulating to be able to put the headphones on and to be able to put a little bit of space and distance around you through having that unique and individual experience with the headphones, that I think could be quite comforting and reassuring and create a secure base for their adventurous imagination to fly.
Thank you so much. Oh God, we're out of time, everybody. It's just literally flown by, and there's still so much more to kind of discuss and explore. But sadly, we will have to end it here. So I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's been here listening, and especially to Jo, Alison and Becky. I really appreciate having your insights this evening, and I wish I could do more with you. For anyone who's listening, we're going to be putting this up on our blog soon. So if you want to find out more from any of the guests or from us, there's going to be all the information there and some key takeaways. So yeah, be able to share it with everybody. So a big, huge thank you. Enjoy your evening, dinner, wine, tea, and we'll see you next time in our next webinar. Take care. Bye-bye.